What you doing? Dad, do you know what happened to the pamphlet that was along with the 2 phones in the car? The one we got from Cricket?
No, your mother bought that stuff in.
Yeah, I have to ask her for it because that's the only way I have to call that number to get the replacement. If I don't have that number, I can't get the replacement.
What the hell are you doing down there? Big dummy? Don't know what the hell that was.
I got school tomorrow now.
This story has a very graphic ending, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please put a single metal fork in the like button's microwave, set it for 99 minutes, hit start, and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Before we get into today's story, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. Back in 2015, when I was still in the military and was not on YouTube yet, I fell into a very deep depression. I was mad all the time, I was isolating myself, I was basically self-destructing. And eventually, after my family encouraged me to do so, I did go out and get help. I sought out a therapist, and honestly, looking back, I think that decision saved my life. So when BetterHelp, which is a very highly reviewed online therapy platform, reached out to me and asked if we could partner, I immediately said yes because I know therapy works. For the last couple of months, I've been using their platform and it's great. It's easy to use, it's affordable, all their therapists are licensed and accredited, but in my opinion, the best and most unique aspect of BetterHelp is that it's all online. Back in 2015, I almost didn't seek out a therapist because I was so concerned about physically walking into the therapist's office and having someone who knows me see me walking in and judging me. But with BetterHelp, you can get the help you need from the comfort of your home and in total anonymity. Sign up is super easy. You just fill out a questionnaire and then right away a therapist gets in touch with you and they set up a time to talk to you within 48 hours. And if you want to change your therapist at any time, it's free and very easy to do. So if you think talking to someone could benefit you like it benefited me, then go to betterhelp.com/MrBallin. That's better, H-E-L-P. And if you sign up using the Mr. Ballin link in the description, you'll get 10% off your first month. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Anonymity.
The Sierra Madre Oriental is a major mountain range starts on the southern border of Texas and Mexico and cuts 700 miles south through the northeastern section of Mexico. About halfway down this mountain range on the eastern face lies a series of caves, and situated below these caves at the foot of the mountains are several small villages that are very isolated, and they're populated primarily with illiterate poor farmers. One night back in May of 1963, a 14-year-old boy named Sebastian Guerrero, who lived in one of these small isolated villages, decided to go for a walk up in the mountains, and he wanted to go explore the different caves. Now, this was something he did fairly regularly because there was a local rumor that there was actually hidden treasure in these different caves. Now, it's unclear if Sebastian literally believed that, or if that was just kind of an excuse to go have a look around himself. But regardless, he headed out of his house and he began walking up the mountain towards these caves. The entrance to these caves were a couple hundred feet up the mountainside, and then each of the various entrances, which ranged in size from fairly small to enormous, were spread out a couple of miles in each direction. So Sebastian starts walking up the mountain towards the first entrance he can see. It's dark outside, he's got no flashlight, he's just walking up, and as he's walking, he notices off to his right, fairly far away from where he was, there was light coming out of one of the cave entrances. And he had never recalled seeing light coming out of any of these caves. Nobody ever went in these caves, especially not at night. And so his interest was piqued. He decided he would kind of abandon his original plan to just kind of look around near his village, and he would actually walk all the way over to that lit up cave and see what was going on. So he turned right and began kind of walking uphill at an angle in the direction of this lit up cave. And so as he's walking, he's getting farther and farther away from the village where he lives, and he's starting to hear sounds coming out of this lit up cave entrance. It sounds like a person potentially, either they're laughing or they're screaming, he doesn't really know. He's thinking, maybe someone's having a party inside one of these caves. He has no idea. But after he gets maybe 200 or 300 feet away from this entrance, he realizes it's definitely a person, and they're definitely screaming. And it does not sound like they're screaming out of joy. It sounds like they're screaming because they're scared or they're in pain. And as he's getting closer and closer and closer to this cave, his anxiety is starting to ramp up. He's really starting to be frightened by what he's hearing, and he's starting to realize there's more than one person inside of this cave. In addition to the person that is screaming out, there also sounds to be a large contingent of other people that are either singing in unison or chanting in unison, but some group of people are doing something in unison while some other person is screaming out. And so he's really starting to get nervous about this cave, but he just can't help feeling curious about what was going on. And so he just continued walking until he was maybe 10 feet away from the entrance to this cave, and he plopped down behind a rock. And so he's not really sure if it's a good idea to look. He doesn't want to be spotted by whoever is in there, but finally he kind of works up the courage. He takes a deep breath, he slips out from behind the rock, and he goes right to the edge of this big opening, maybe 10-foot across opening. And he peeks his head right around the edge of the opening, and he looks inside, and what he sees causes him to just freeze in terror. Then his survival instincts just kick in, and he turns and he starts running down the mountain away from this cave. He has no idea if he's been spotted or not, but he's sensing that someone could be chasing him, and so he is just running as if his life depended on it. And he would not run back to his village. Instead, he would run nearly 10 miles to the nearest police station. And when he gets there, he busts through the front doors, and he's totally hysterical. He's drenched in sweat, and the police officers are totally caught off guard. So they're trying to tell him to calm down. And so Sebastian finally would kind of compose himself, but then he just was not able to describe what he had seen inside of this cave. Whatever he had seen, he knew it was bad, but the words were just escaping him. And so the way he described it to police was he basically thought he saw vampires. And as soon as he began describing vampires to the police, they're thinking to themselves,
vampires,
I don't know what's going on with this kid, but this just cannot be serious. And so they consoled him and kind of calmed him down and said, look, kid, I don't know what you're talking about. If there's any news that comes out of something happening in the cave that's bad, I'm sure we'll hear about it and we'll follow up. But for now, we're just going to bring you back to your village. And so at this, Sebastian was really frustrated, and he was kind of pleading with the police, like, no, you got to take me seriously. There's something bad happening in this cave. Someone could be hurt. Someone could be dying. I don't know, but you got to go to this cave. You got to go see what's going on. But the police at this point, they're just not really interested, and so they ultimately do just drive him back to his village. And so he goes back into his home, the police go back to their station, and everyone just kind of goes to bed for the night. And the next day, when Sebastian wakes up, he just can't shake what he saw inside of that cave. And And so he would once again run back to the police station, and when he got there, he began pleading with the police, like, you gotta go see what's inside of this cave. I'm telling you, there's something awful in there. And this time, one of the police officers, his name was Luis Martinez, he would say, okay, kid, bring me to this cave and I'll have a look around. And so Luis and Sebastian were very grateful. They left the police station, they hopped in a police car, and they took off. Then, later on in the day, the other police officers, who were not really paying attention to this cave thing, they realized that Luis and the boy had not returned yet, and Luis had not checked in via his radio. And so at some point in the afternoon that day, the other officers began calling out to Luis. They began calling him on his radio, trying to figure out what's going on, but he wasn't responding. And so the police thought that was odd, but they thought, you know what, I'm sure he'll be back soon. There's got to be an explanation for this. But the rest of the day would go by without Luis reaching out to them, and he didn't return with the boy. And so by that evening, the other officers were genuinely concerned that something bad had happened to their colleague. And so they tried calling Luis a few more times on the radio, and it didn't work. And so the officers, they made their way over to Sebastian's village, and they found Sebastian's family, believing that maybe the boy was back and he could get some insight into where Luis went. But when they talked to Sebastian's family, they would say, hey, he's not back yet either. And so both Sebastian and Luis at this point have not talked to anyone all day, and they are missing. And so the police at this point, they realize this is an emergency. They need to figure out where these two went. And so they were kind of understaffed. And so they contacted the Mexican army. They explained, we're missing one of our colleagues, we're missing a child from this village. And so the Mexican army would actually send out a military unit to assist them in going and finding these two people. And so the unit, they show up later that night, and the police and the Mexican army, they head out to where this cave was. And when they saw what was inside the cave, they were shocked. To understand what was found inside of this cave, we need to go back 6 months to December of 1962. That month, two brothers, Santos and Cayetano Hernandez, who made their living basically traveling around Mexico, stealing from people and swindling people, they decided they were going to pull off the biggest heist yet. They were going to rip off the entire town. Their plan was to go into a small, fairly isolated village that was populated primarily with poor and illiterate people, and they would go in there and they would convince the villagers that they, the brothers, were actually prophets of an exiled Incan god. And if these villagers did everything they said, they would make them rich. And so the village the brothers identified as their target was a place called La Yerba Buena, which was located right at the foot of the Sierra Madre Oriental, right below where that cave was that Luis and Sebastian went to investigate. And La Yerba Buena was exactly what the brothers were looking for. It was home to only about 20 families that were all very poor and illiterate, and they were very suggestible. And so right before the new year, the Hernandez brothers strolled into La Yerba Buena, and they put on this very dramatic show explaining how they were the prophets of the Incan god. And these two brothers, they were very charismatic, they were excellent salesmen. They really sold the lie. And these villagers who were very vulnerable and cut off really from the rest of the world, they believed them. They thought this was their big break. They're going to be rich. We just have to do whatever they say. And so almost immediately, the villagers effectively became the Hernandez brothers' slaves. They could give them anything they wanted and do anything they wanted. But after a couple of months of this, some of the villagers started to be frustrated with the Hernandez brothers, the prophets, because it seemed like they were not really working towards making the villagers rich. Instead, it just seemed like they were horribly mistreating the villagers. And it just didn't feel like this was a relationship that was benefiting the villagers. And so when the sentiment began to kind of make its way around the 70-ish people who lived in La Yerba Buena, the brothers picked up on it, and they could have, at that point, just kind of abandoned their gig. At this point, they've robbed the town dry. There's nothing left for them to give to the brothers. But for whatever reason, the brothers decide instead to salvage their operation. And so the brothers, they leave the village and they go to a city that's relatively close by, and they recruit this young woman, prostitute, and they tell her, hey, we have this con we're doing in La Yerba Buena where we're pretending to be prophets of the Incan god, and they're starting not to believe our lie, and so we need you, if you're willing to come with us and pretend to be an actual Incan goddess. And so when you show up, they'll know that we were serious, that we have a direct line to the Incan gods and goddesses, and they'll believe us again, and they'll fall back in line. And so Magdalena, she likes the idea of participating in this con, and so she agrees to do it in exchange for some money. And so she, along with the Hernandez brothers and Magdalena's brother, his name was Eliezer, and he functioned as her pimp, those 4 people, they went back to Yerba Buena, and when they got there, the Hernandez brothers snuck Magdalena past all the villagers up to that cave up in the mountains, and they put her in the back of the cave. They kind of hid her behind some rocks, and they dressed her up in an Incan goddess costume. And then once she was in there, the brothers went back down to the village, and they rounded all the villagers up and said, "Come on, let's go up to the cave, we have a special ceremony for you." And so the villagers made their way up to this cave, and once they were all inside, the Hernandez brothers used some basic magic tricks and created basically a smoke screen. Once they had the smoke screen kind of billowing in the back of the cave, they secretly signaled to Magdalena, who was behind the smoke screen, and she knew that was her cue, and she leapt through the smoke, and she presented herself to the villagers for the first time, and she declared herself to be a reincarnated Incan goddess. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to kill you. And so the message she was sending to the villagers was so intense, they completely believed that this was an Incan goddess. Therefore, this was not a ruse. The brothers were not lying to them. This was all very real. There's a real goddess in front of us. And so they immediately fell right back in line. The plan worked exactly as the brothers wanted it to. However, there was an element of their plan that they could not possibly have accounted for. And that was what Magdalena did next. Even though Magdalena was fully aware that what she was getting herself into was an act, it was a con, it was not real. Despite that, as soon as she jumped through the smoke and was standing in front of the villagers for the first time and saw the looks on these people's faces as they stared up at her, and she saw their reverence for her, Within the first few days of her stay at La Yerba Buena, Magdalena used threats of violence on the villagers to completely take over the village. She very easily supplanted the Hernandez brothers at the top of the power structure. Now, the Hernandez brothers probably were quite surprised to see this happen because they were expecting Magdalena to play more of a prop role to keep them in power, not the other way around. But ultimately, they kind of just went along with it because through Magdalena's control over the villagers, they were able to continue to exploit the villagers. And so they were getting what they wanted out of this relationship. Within a few weeks of being in La Yerba Buena, Magdalena was not only abusing every villager in every horrible way imaginable, she also was becoming completely delusional. She convinced herself that in order to survive, she needed to start drinking blood. And so she demanded all the villagers provide her with blood. And so in fear of retribution, the villagers began slaughtering all of their farm animals and their own pets so Magdalena could drink their blood. For weeks and weeks and weeks, the horrible abuse Magdalena would dole out on villagers would continue, and these blood rituals would continue. And then finally, sometime in April, 2 of the villagers decided, you know what, I've had enough. I don't believe Magdalena is actually an Incan goddess. I don't believe the Hernandez brothers are actually prophets. I think this is all a scam. And so they decided the way they would handle this is they were just going to flee the village. Now, somehow their plans to run away got out, and the Hernandez brothers found out about it, and they, in turn, told Magdalena about it, and when she heard the news, she immediately told everyone in the village to make their way up to the cave for a special ceremony. So all the villagers, including the 2 people that were planning on running away, they made way up to the cave, and once everyone was inside, Magdalena walked to the front of the group, and she pointed at the 2 dissenters, the 2 people that were planning on running, and she demanded that the rest of the villagers kill them. And on the spot, all of the other villagers jumped on top of the 2 dissenters, and they lynched them. They beat them to death in the cave. And then after these 2 people have been killed, Magdalena orders their bodies be strung up on these 2 pikes she had set up in the back of the cave because she knew what she was going to be doing up in this cave. And so after these 2 bodies were strung up on these pikes, Magdalena grabs a chalice and she walks over to these 2 bodies and she presses the chalice up against their bodies where they're bleeding from, and she fills it up and then she drinks from the chalice. And at this point, everything changed. Suddenly, Magdalena understood that it wasn't good enough to just be drinking animal blood. That was not enough to keep her, a goddess, alive. She now could only consume human blood. And so for the next several weeks, periodically, Magdalena would order everyone in the village to go back up to the cave for a blood ritual, which they all knew what this entailed. This no longer had anything to do with animals. This was human blood rituals. She would order them up and they would have no idea who was going to be the sacrifice. And so all these people, they get inside this dark cave, and then Magdalena shows up and she stands in front of them, and after kind of looking them over, she identifies her next sacrifice, and out of fear, the other villagers, who were the friends and family of the victim, would launch themselves on top of the chosen sacrifice and lynch them in the cave. And then afterwards, their body would be strung up on the pikes, and Magdalena would walk over with her chalice was she would fill it with blood and she would drink it. And so this would go on and on for several weeks. And one of the most distressing aspects of these human sacrifices is that as she did more and more and more of them, Magdalena got it in her head that beating the sacrifice to death before consuming their blood was spoiling the blood in some way. And so what she began doing was she would have the other villagers beat the sacrifice into submission, and then she would have the sacrifice strung up to one of the pikes while they were still alive, and then she would carve their heart out while they were alive, and then she would drink their blood. So in May of 1963, when Sebastian, the 14-year-old boy, when he poked his head around and looked into that cave, he watched one of these sacrifices having their heart cut out. And he didn't know what to make of it, and so he ran to the police, and then the next day, he and the police officer, Luis Martinez, they would go back to the cave, and Magdalena and her cult would spot them, capture them, and drag them both into the cave, and both of them would be ritualistically sacrificed. They would have their hearts cut out, and Magdalena would drink their blood. When the police and army arrived in La Yerba Buena, it was a ghost town because all of the villagers had been ordered up to the cave where they had barricaded themselves inside with weapons because Magdalena probably knew there was going to be a big police response because one of their officers has gone missing out here. They're bound to be found out. And so when the police and the army reach the cave, there's this big shootout with all of the villagers. And during the shootout, the majority of the villagers are killed. Also, the Hernandez brothers, they're also killed in the shootout. And then after the shootout stopped, the police and the army would go into this cave and they would discover the pikes, the bloody pikes that are in the back of the cave with bits of human remains all over the ground. And then they would leave the cave and they would search the town and they would find the remains of Luis and Sebastian outside a particular shack. And then inside the shack was Magdalena and her brother Eliezer. They were still alive. They were trying to hide from the authorities, and so they would be arrested. It's believed Magdalena sacrificed and drank the blood of at least 15 of the villagers over a 6-week period. However, the only remains to be positively identified were Luis Martinez and Sebastian Guerrero. Ultimately, Magdalena and her brother Eliezer were sentenced to 50 years in prison, and all of the surviving villagers who participated in these sacrifices or who participated in the shootout with police and the army, they were given 30 years in prison. Amazingly, none of the villagers ever testified against Magdalena or her brother, despite the fact they were almost certainly offered reduced sentences in exchange for their testimony. Clearly, they were more terrified of the Incan goddess than they were terrified of the prospect of 30 years in prison. Although the exact date of when this happened is not known, Magdalena would eventually die behind bars. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please put a single metal fork in the like button's microwave, set it for 99 minutes, hit start, and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 1 or 2 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and sweatshirts and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested, go to shopmrballin.com. If you want to learn about upcoming deals and promotions for our shop, go to our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballin. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's just Mr. Ballin. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is also Mr. Ballin. We also have a second YouTube channel just called Mr. Ballin Shorts where we post random short videos and lost episodes. We also have a Facebook page just called Mr. Ballin where we post condensed versions of the longer episodes you see on YouTube. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See you.
Family is everything, especially in this case. When a young girl's life spiraled out of control, her brother stepped in to help her. And when she vanished without a trace on July 3rd, 2014, he did what police couldn't do and uncovered the terrible truth behind her sudden disappearance. Welcome to Fear Files, where we discuss and dissect the most mysterious, terrifying, and mind-bending cases from all over the we start, we would like to say that our thoughts and prayers go to the friends and family of Lee Porter, who fell victim to the deranged actions of one man. Porter grew up with her family in Pueblo, Colorado, one of the largest steel-producing cities in the United States. Despite the city's relatively high crime rates, Lee grew up in a close and happy family. From a young age, Lee was someone who would put a smile on everyone's face. Growing up, she often spent time dressing up and creating skits, which she would perform for friends and family. Of course, her family cheered her on, just as they would with everything else she did. These performances created precious moments for the Porter family, moments that would go on to become cherished memories. Lee was from a close-knit family, and nowhere was that more evident than in her relationship with her older brother, Max. Even before she was born, a young Max expressed excited anticipation for the day his little sister would be born. It was clear from the earliest days that this relationship was going to be a special one, and it was. Growing up, friends and family described them as best friends who were virtually inseparable. They grew up playing within the same circle of local friends, and it was a bond that would only strengthen during their high school years. At Cotopaxi High School, Lee was an average student who enjoyed hanging around with the artsy crowd and listening to electronic music. Like most teens her age, she loved capturing every moment of her life on her phone. When it came time for Max to go to college, Lee was keen to go with him. So when her own graduation arrived, Lee chose to follow Max to the same college, where she studied the same course in massage therapy. College life started out well for young Lee. According to those who knew her, she loved her classes and was enthusiastic about her future career. She also had no problem making friends. Just as she had done in the past, however, Lee often preferred hanging out with her brother and his friends over her own peers and classmates. It was no great surprise then that Lee took Max's graduation from college as a devastating blow. Not only had she lost her closest friend, she had lost an important pillar of support in the social circle she had come to depend on. After graduating with his major, Max found himself a job. For Lee, meeting with her brother now required a long flight or an even longer drive. The impact of this on her emotional health was soon clear to all who knew her, and marked the beginning of a tragic downward spiral that friends and family could only watch helplessly from the side. The child that once lit up a room and put a smile on everyone's faces was now visibly withdrawn and sullen. The laugh that had come so easily now rarely, if ever, came at all. She had become like a shell of her old self. Soon, there was another reason for Lee's deteriorating mood. She was in the middle of a turbulent breakup. Lee had been dating a man named Jesse Mine for 6 months. At 38, Mine was way older than Lee. Mine was a tattoo artist, and according to one of Lee's friends, it was Mine that introduced her to a new kind of high: heroin. Soon after Max left for California, Lee dropped out of college and moved in with Mine. Mallory Nixon, one of Lee's friends, said that it was Jesse Mine who introduced Lee to heroin. She described the moment she discovered Lee was experimenting with the drug. The two girls were driving to a concert in Denver when Lee confessed to her friend that she had been using heroin and was now addicted. The news devastated Mallory, who expressed her feelings to Lee and set about helping her friend in any way she possibly could. The two attended a meeting hosted by Narcotics Anonymous to help Lee kick the habit. But with Max in California, her college degree shelved, and her rocky relationship with Jesse Mine finally coming to an end, Lee found herself homeless. She had made the decision to move to Denver, and on her Facebook account posted a request to friends to help her in making the move. Around this time, she also contacted her brother Max and confided in him about her heroin use. Max was both devastated and baffled. He knew Lee better than anyone, and this was completely out of character for her. He warned Lee of the dangers of heroin, but was wary of saying anything that would push her away and prevent her from confiding in him. On the day prior to June 3rd, 2014, Mallory met with Lee. She later described Lee as, quote,
He said the sprayer. The sprayer.
Just when you thought you knew everything there is to know about your dog, you find out how your old pooch actually is. And have you ever wondered why he scoots his butt across the floor? Because he's not well behaved, right? Not exactly. Find out the truth about these dog myths and more in this video. But scooching dogs are bad. So you bought a new carpet, and this is what your pup does on it. How do you react? Bad dog, right? Well, no. It's a common misconception that dogs who scoot their butts across the floor are not properly trained. To many of us, this looks weird when a dog does this, and maybe even funny. However, this behavior has nothing to do with your pup not having any manners. But actually, 99% of the time, a butt scooting canine means that your dog has a health problem. It can either be parasites or the animal's anal glands are full. This indicates your dog needs to be treated ASAP by a vet. Next time Rover does this on the carpet, make sure to have him checked out. Dog poop fertilizer. Another outrageous myth about dogs is that their poop is supposed to be good for fertilizing plants. Not only is this myth untrue, but it has been scientifically proven that dog poop does just the opposite for your garden. While cow poop is a great fertilizer for plants, dog poop should not by any means be used for this purpose. The reason for this is that the diet of a dog is very high in proteins, resulting in very acidic feces, which is not a suitable environment to grow plants. Dog fashion. You've probably seen dogs walking around wearing shoes and other types of dog clothing. While dog fashion has become a thing amongst passionate dog owners who like to dress up their dogs, dog fashion is not just fashion. When taking out your pup for a walk in very hot or very cold weather, dog shoes actually do help keep their paws protected. I'd like to see you walking barefoot on the sidewalk or street while it's very hot out or really cold. In addition to dog shoes, ponchos, or other types of dog clothing also help keep your furry four-legged friend warm during the colder days. It is also commonly believed that a dog's cold, wet nose is a sign of good health. This is also a myth. Though a dog has a moist nose most of the time, his sniffer naturally changes from wet and cool to warm and dry several times during the day, depending on his activities. Most times, a dry nose is completely normal. It could mean your dog has woken up from a nap near a heater, or he might have slept in the sun and just needs a bit to drink. If your dog's dry nose looks concerning, and he is actually sick, you'll immediately notice a change in his daily routine, activity, and appetite. These are better indicators that will help you sniff out the real problem. A dog's mouth is cleaner than a human's. There also seems to be a misconception about how clean a dog's mouth is. Some believe it is even cleaner than a human's. The mouths of both humans and dogs harbor a lot of bacteria. Dogs don't brush their teeth. They sometimes eat out of the litter box or garbage bin, and you know exactly where else they put their mouth. These should be strong enough reasons to debunk the myth of a dog's mouth being clean. But if you're still not convinced, you should also know that 80 to 90% of dogs over 3 years of age have some form of periodontal disease in their mouth. Surely something to consider before you let your dog lick your face the next time. A dog's saliva has healing qualities. Because dogs tend to lick their wounds, it is assumed that a dog's saliva has healing qualities. However, it is not necessarily the saliva that speeds up the healing process. By licking its wounds, a dog is actually trying to remove dirt, debris, and any unwanted foreign objects. But remember, a dog's mouth is full of bacteria, so letting them lick their wounds actually delays the healing process and can even cause an infection. It's better to prevent them from doing this by wearing a special collar around their neck. A sleepy dog yawns. When a dog yawns, it may look as if he's about to take a nap or that he's bored. But unlike humans, dogs don't yawn because they're sleepy. They tend to yawn for different reasons. By yawning, a dog is actually preparing its body for an action. When a dog yawns, the lungs fill up with air, which boosts the flow of oxygen to the brain. This will also cause the dog's heart to beat faster. When a dog yawns, he can be excited and is waiting to do something. But it can also be an indicator for anxiety and stress, which is almost always accompanied by other forms of tense body language, like flattened ears or wide eyes. Dogs also yawn when they're confused, and they yawn to let other dogs know that they do not feel threatened. Fun fact, dogs are susceptible to human yawns. Go ahead, give it a try with your pooch and see if it works. Food will motivate any dog. So, you're trying to teach Rover a new trick, but he's not responding to a treat. This doesn't mean your dog is untrainable. It just means your dog gets motivated by other things. Not all dogs can be trained using a snack as a motivator. For some dogs, mainly those who get enough nutrition from their daily diet, it takes more than a few kibbles. Things like toys, praises, or just some quality time with their owner will get them excited. Some dogs are really smart and even capable of warding off a treat because they know that something better might be in store. More baths are better. There's nothing nicer than cuddling up with a freshly bathed puppy. You might even think that frequent baths would be better for your dog. However, this isn't necessarily true. Vets even warn against it. It might seem logical that the only way your dog smells clean is if he takes more baths. That may be true, but eventually it can become a problem. It's really not recommended to soak your pup daily or even once a week. Doing this causes dry skin, an oily coat, or dandruff, resulting in other hygienic issues. While the frequency of washing may be different for each dog, a good rule to follow is giving Rover a bath every 4 weeks. This will not only maintain a clean skin and coat, but will also allow the natural oil of the skin to spread out for better conditioning. Dogs eat grass for a reason. Your beloved Pooch isn't a cow, so it might come as quite a surprise when you see him eating grass like one. You might even be worried. No one is certain why dogs eat grass, but there are several theories for the odd behavior though. Some people believe it's to relieve a stomachache. Some think it's to help them throw up when they feel sick. And the other theory is that dogs just like the taste of grass. However, there is really no scientific evidence to back up these theories. For whatever reason your dog is munching on the lawn from time to time, the odd behavior is really not a problem. Just make sure the grass your dog eats is not treated with pesticides. Rescue dogs are bad. The most sad myth about dogs is that rescue dogs are bad, because you just don't know where they came from, right? And there must be a reason why the dog is unwanted. Not only is this myth so far from the truth, but it also diminishes the chances for a rescue dog to be adopted from the get-go. Rescue dogs can be aggressive, but most of the time this is because they weren't properly trained, or even worse, they were poorly treated. But even when raising puppies, there's no guarantee that they won't be aggressive. In general, any dog who doesn't receive proper socialization training can be aggressive, so try to give a rescue dog a chance the next time you decide to get a dog. Once a dog bites, it's the end. Many dog owners assume that once a dog has bitten someone, it means it's time to put the Pooch to sleep. The dog becomes a liability and cannot be trusted again. It's understandable that no one actually wants to euthanize their dog, and really, no one has to either, because aggression in dogs is a very treatable problem. Every case is different, so it's important to get some professional help. A veterinary behaviorist can help determine what caused the dog to bite in the first place, and how to prevent it from happening in the future. Most of the time, a dog will resort to biting when it feels threatened, not just because he feels like it. No hiding. It is also widely believed that many dog owners won't allow their dog to hide behind them when they're afraid. The dog is then forced to come out of hiding and has to face his fears. But this actually causes more damage to your dog's mental health. It will negatively affect your relationship with your dog, as your Pooch will develop trust issues. So, if you want to help your canine overcome its fears, it's better to patiently work with them to gradually desensitize them to this fear. Using proper dog training methods is a must. 1 year is not 7 human years. Let's say it's your dog's 4th birthday, and you want to celebrate it with a doggy cake. How many candles do you need? Popular belief claims that 1 dog year equals 7 human years. So, does this mean you need 28 candles? Well, not exactly. This generalization is actually not true, and the math is not that simple. According to a study from researchers at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine, a method was discovered to calculate the actual age of dogs. By tracking molecular changes in DNA and changing methyl group patterns in the genome, they are able to tell the age of a dog. Based on this calculation, a 1-year-old dog is comparable to a 30-year-old human, while a 4-year-old dog is comparable to a 52-year-old human. Dogs just age at a rapid pace compared to humans, especially when they're young. That's why a 9-month-old dog can have puppies. They age much faster than we do. However, their aging slows down around their 7th year. So next time you celebrate your dog's birthday, take a minute to realize how old he actually is, and how lucky you are to still have him with you. Which of these dog myths was new to you? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time.
Now for some fast facts. The longest living person was a woman who made it 122 years and 164 days, which isn't bad for a species with an average lifespan of 72 years. There was also a cat that set the record for the feline community by living to 38 years. Yet dogs aren't so lucky. which means we humans, who've dubbed these lovable, goofy creatures as our best friends, really feel the sting. A 13-year-old person has their whole life ahead of them, yet a 13-year-old dog is considered a senior at that age. While we humans take up to 18 years to stop growing and developing, a dog is usually full-grown at 18 months. Canines do have their own record setters. An Australian cattle dog born in 1910 lived to be an impressive 29 years old. Impressive given that most dogs live on average from 10 to 13 years, depending on the breed, of course. Lifestyle and health play an important role as well, but that's another story. We've all heard the statistic, 1 dog year equals 7 years for a human. But the 1 to 7 thing isn't as simple and universal as it's often quoted. It's more like, for the first year of their life, dogs age 15 human years. Then they age about 4 human years with each birthday. After 6 years of life, the larger breeds start aging at a faster rate. And this can help explain why a Great Dane